Hey, Magic, can you hear us?
Yeah, hold on one second. Let me turn you down.
How dare you turn me down?
How you guys doing?
Hey, thank you so much, Shadow Warden. Yeah, we're doing great. Starting off with a couple gifted subs. Hype Train might start soon. Fucking, who knew talking to an anonymous crypto bro would fucking bring in the Benjamins? But that's just what happens when people that understand money, or I should say currency, come in. Is it just brings out that spirit of purchasing power.
They've got taste. What can I say? So
Do you have a camera?
I do not have a camera. Is that okay?
That's okay. Yeah, no, it's fine. I was just asking because, might as well.
Yeah, no worries. So I wanted to talk about anarcho-capitalism, sort of how that fits into your worldview. I think because you live in America, right?
Yeah, so I don't really know you. So before
Sure.
we get into like the idea of like what topics you wanted to broach with me, tell us a little about like who you are. Obviously you don't have to dox yourself, but like who you are, where you're coming from politically, and then maybe like, going into like what it is that you wanted to talk about.
Okay, yeah. So politically, I guess I come from traditionally I was like a sort of classical liberal type person. Yeah, and I've sort of Bernie bro type stuff. I've sort of strayed from that path since Bernie. But so just like a little bit more background is like I started mining Bitcoin in 2013. I ended up stopped mining Bitcoin, but I've been sort of like involved in cryptocurrency and
you own your Bitcoin, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
you don't have like stocks in it. All right, cool. Just curious.
And so I've been involved in crypto and then Ethereum blew up in 2017 and I've been sort of heavily involved with stuff involving that since. I don't know if you guys know anything about, anything that's going on in Ethereum with all the decentralized finance and all that jazz, but been heavy into that.
I'm a political Twitch streamer in the libertarian space. So despite the fact that I'm not really like a crypto bro, I probably know more than like your average normie in that regard.
Yeah, I got you. It's really just been interesting because once these applications started to get built on top of Ethereum, it sort of opened me up to. I mean, I had read about Austrian economics and stuff like that from learning about Bitcoin originally. Those sort of Bitcoin maxis are very religious about that sort of idea. But once these applications started getting built on top of Ethereum, it started resembling a lot of like what I was reading about in terms of like free banking and sort of like what I envision as like a healthier economic system based on like real money, not sort of the quantitative easing and fractional reserve banking and all that. So that sort of opened my eyes up to sort of like the economic.
So you're saying that you kind of went into crypto, and because of the kind of the inherently political nature of the power of cryptocurrency to kind of meaningfully challenge fiat currency and the stranglehold that that many of those systems have, it kind of led you into this kind of view of money and economics and philosophy that made you more libertarian.
Yeah, like I mean, it's pretty amazing. Like inscribed in the very first block on Bitcoin is the headline from the newspaper, which is like banks on the brink of bailout. Chancellor considers some economic stimulus package or something. It's basically a newspaper from the day talking about the bailouts in 2008. So yeah, I mean, like the whole crypto space is like extremely political.
Yes.
And so yeah, it sort of led me towards more being libertarian. But what I've also seen is sort of a like first like a huge forget the term, but like an explosion of innovation and evolution and like open source code being published by anonymous developers, and then that code getting forked and people copying it and changing it and tweaking things and adjusting the parameters and creating entirely new novel systems. And it's truly like just mind-blowing, like the amount of experiments that are basically going on.
Yeah.
And God, I lost my train of thought.
So we're floundering. Yeah, we're floundering here a little bit. But like, what is it that you wanted to talk to me about specifically?
Oh, right. Yeah, no, organization. So basically, I've seen both some projects, you know, they succeed and they seem to have an organizational structure that allows more development on top of the protocol, and then other protocols that honestly I think you know, it's a total failure of organizational structure, and it turns into like a bad situation where basically there's like a lot of people with economic vested interest in something, but it's like dying in committee. And I don't know really how to bridge my desire for like the open market that encourages that innovation with sort of what I understand as like real life. What you know,
I think the biggest problem that I see with crypto is that most people don't understand crypto, right? And so
yes, that's a huge issue.
So the information failure of that often leads people to, and so because of it, it's full of people that are grifters and, you know, fraudulent people. Right. And so the crypto market is very volatile because it's new and because it's made up of a lot of people that are hoping to like get rich quick and invest. And there's a lot of people that are taking advantage of people's lack of understanding and knowledge in doing that. But ultimately, I would say that just from like a perspective of like state run monopolistic systems of currency versus the private enterprise and the free market, it is not possible for crypto to be less stable than fiat currency in the long run. It's not possible that those systems that are set up by institutions like, you know, the IMF or the World Bank or the EU or, you know, the Federal Reserve, right? It's not possible for, in my approximation, for those systems to remain kind of more stable and more able to adapt to the market than the free market will ultimately be able to do. It's simply that what we're talking about is a system of early adopters and new technology that we're struggling to understand.
Yeah, but I suppose my you know, sort of the question I really have is like sort of, so you call yourself a anarcho-capitalist. How?
Yeah, that's because that's what I am.
It's not you're not against organizations that I guess you know, try to explain it to me, because I've read a lot about anarcho-capitalism. But I see a lot of different ideas sometimes it's communes, sometimes it's like rights enforcement agencies.
Right. So here's the thing that is very different between a lot of leftist anarchism, right, and right-wing anarchism. Let's start there first. Let's deal with the anarchism portion, like historically. So anarchism is developed by Proudhon and his contemporaries Bakunin, his understudy Chaudet, and in the Americas, in North America, in the U.S., there are a lot of anarcho-individualists, which we are probably more in line with Benjamin Tucker, Lysander Spooner, Josiah Warren, etc. And so what eventually happened to the idea of anarchism is after the death of Proudhon, after Bakunin's dead, after Sade is murdered at the Paris Commune because he didn't want to collectivize property and instead wanted the sole right of the private property owner. Individuals such as Kropotkin, Maltesa, Hermos drive out the kind of the other wing of anarchism, which is an individualist philosophy that believes in private property or believes in market economies like the mutualists, and kind of like they kind of sit in between us. And so because of that, anarchism is often thought of in what it is mostly dominated by, right? Because anarcho-capitalism doesn't come around until Murray Rothbard, right? And he takes the ideas of, Hayek and Sartre and Mises and kind of like the Austrian school of thought of economics, which was predominant until the 1920s. And he combines those understandings of modern economic theory and philosophy as it's gone forward with kind of the old vein of anarcho-individualist philosophy, and hammers down that philosophy in terms of natural law and rights and theory. The problem is that we're a much, much smaller portion, the volunteerists, individualists, the egoists even, and the ANCAPs, the kind of more right-wing for sectors of anarchism, are a very small minority compared to the anarcho-communists, syndicalists. And these people have blended Marxist philosophy deeply with their anarchism. And so their view of anarchism is against hierarchy, is against all forms of hierarchical structure. And so it kind of sounds like a misnomer to call us anarchists and to understand those things. The second thing to understand about anarcho-capitalism is that anarcho-capitalism, for the most part, is a descriptive philosophy about what is unjustified. It's not necessarily prescriptive. And so while a lot of other philosophies say, this is what you should do, or there's a moral impetus to do a certain thing, what our philosophy says is, via Argumentation Ethics, 1986 from Hans Hermann Hoppe, but other writings as well, is that this thing known as the non-aggression principle and the right of self-ownership and the right of private property through why can I never think of the word homesteading, right? Is something that is a part of the natural law and order of conflict avoidance. And that by definition, it is morally unjustifiable to engage upon aggression against another person. And so the reason you see people talk about covenant communities, people talk about communes, people talk about rights enforcement agencies, these are all different ideas that are commiserate with the anarcho-capitalist philosophy. And these are different implementations of the same philosophy that is not necessarily prescriptive, but is saying this is what you can't do. You can't tax people against their will. You can't initiate aggression upon another person. You can't go up to someone and, with some form of legal system and moralize and say, I think homosexuality is wrong because it's icky or because God said so. And now I force you to live a lifestyle or engage in behavior that I say through threat of violence, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why anarcho-capitalism tends to look like all these different types of things, because there are different theorists explaining what one could do, what one would be free to do, and ways in which we might solve the problems that we as a people, recognize exist in the world through different mechanisms that all are commiserate with that philosophy that says these are the things that are morally unjustifiable. These are the things that are wrong to do.
Okay, and so how does that inform your I guess your voting or like, because I'm trying to get to a place where I can envision like a path from where we are in the United States now to what I envision as a more decentralized, more responsive system to the people that live there in each locality. And I don't know if just, you know, voting for the Libertarian Party is get rid of taxes.
There are two philosophies that most ANCAPs, I think, fall under in terms of voting, right? One group says that voting is an initiation of aggression against other people, and that it would be morally wrong to vote because by voting you are putting your kind of your stamp of approval on a system that uses violence against others. And that's a perfectly legitimate, philosophically coherent system. And then I accept that response. That's not my personal philosophy because I fall in the latter group. And the latter group is one that says, or I would say, is that voting is a form of defensive violence. Like when someone breaks into your home, do you shoot them or are you a pacifist? And I would say that it is morally unjustifiable to knowingly vote for someone that you know is going to increase the size and scope of the state, and that it is your obligation as a form of defensive violence, or as, if you prefer, just self-defense, right? To vote for someone that you know, or to the best of your understanding, is going to reduce the power and scope of the state. I fall in that latter category, but yeah, some ANCAPs certainly will argue to the end of the day that the only way to do it is to try and live peacefully, try and gather enough people to live in a commune, and then try and defend yourself and never engage in using that violence proactively against other people. Because ultimately, I might vote for someone that I think is going to reduce the size and power of the state, and then they do some authoritarian shit. And like, I'm kind of I'm not responsible for their actions but the second order consequences of that are do lead to violence towards others. I don't necessarily believe in those second order kind of consequences as a frame of analysis that I find acceptable. But other people would, and I would disagree with them. So that's kind of a debate within ANCAP spaces.
So, is there any? Do you even try to come up with a anarcho-capitalist sort of society in terms of like imagining what one might look like, or do you think that's not even worth thinking about because it's like trying to predict the future, like you just.
I think using metaphors and thought experiments are a great way to engage in conversation, especially when you are dealing with someone that's kind of really trapped in a mind of statist mindset, right? It can be a way to kind of elucidate the possibilities. Because more often than not, the times that I find myself slipping into, let's say, a rights enforcement agency conversation is because I'm talking with someone about policing, and they can't imagine a world where the state isn't in charge of policing and that it could work. And so sometimes it's important to showcase these ideas as possibilities, as things that have the potential to work. That doesn't mean that it is what I would necessarily put forward as what one should do, or that what ANCAP will always look like. But I think they're really useful in saying, look at how things could be done, as a means of destroying the idea that it can't be done. Because often the claims from many people that are very statist in their mindset say it's impossible for us to not have this just become warlords. It's like, okay, well, let me explain how rights enforcement agencies could work and get their brain kind of like thinking about the possibilities. So I think it is useful, but it's more useful from like a strategic standpoint of showcasing the mythology that certain things are impossible is indeed a mythology.
I got you. So, and so what are your thoughts on, I mean, it's really this organizational. I'm trying to phrase this question in a I guess intellectual way. I don't know. I'm looking for wisdom, I guess. Uh it's like the same problems plague every like microcosm of society. It's like infighting and I mentioned this to like death by committee, where like everything just becomes committed and very freezes up sort of the organization, stagnates its decision making.
So I think what you're talking about is something Max Weber, sociologist and critical theorist, like it or not, stated, which is this principle that, bureaucracies tend towards corruption because in a bureaucracy, people kind of go to the, is it the Matthew principle? I always get the principles like Peter, Matthew, and the other ones like Thomas principles confused, but basically people rise to the level of their incompetence, right? So the larger an organization or system gets, the more likely it is that middle management are there because they kind of like, they did good enough to get there, but not good enough to go further. And so that's part of a problem with bureaucracy. What I would say is the democratic process is often one that has many weaknesses and flaws that the sole private property owner does not have, right? Because what the democratic process is conflict. That's what it is. It is the initiation of conflict. It is a violation of the non-aggression principle, unless voluntarily done together and unless people, can divest from that democratic process whenever they want. And so what ends up happening is that you have people with differing ideas of what to do with the same piece of property, right? And now they're attempting to negotiate in such a way where everybody walks away happy, or at least everybody is willing to give up some of their things, their ideals, their opinions, or they're simply outnumbered and they agreed or didn't agree to be as part of a system where if they're outnumbered by a vote of majority, that, tough luck, everybody else is happy, right? And so I would say that private institutions, can be run democratically, and those can come into problems when they are done so. But ultimately, it is the process of bureaucracy and democracy that creates that conflict in the first place, right? It's let's look at example of let's take the spiciest example you can look at, right? Which is the private regulations from the Civil Rights Act. So I'm not talking about the state. I'm not talking about like segregating schools and things. But the idea that it's illegal to not hire somebody or to not serve somebody because of their race. Now, you may look at that and you go, well, that's a good imposition by the government because we want to strive towards equality. But what you're actually doing is you're destroying freedom of association. And you go, well, I don't care if I destroy that freedom of association because I don't want people to freely be racist. And I kind of understand that, right? Like I get that. It's like, I don't want people to be racist either. But the problem is that it doesn't actually solve racism. Instead, what it does is it forces communities of people that don't want to work and live together to work and live together, and increases those tensions. And it drives underground those kind of hated ideas. And so like, I would much rather have a sandwich shop say no N-words allowed. And it's a joke, but I'm partly serious because I know not to go to that sandwich shop. One, because they're racist. And now I don't have to go to a racist shop and I don't have to support them. And there's an actual like drive to like stop that because they realize their ideas are unpopular. But two, I know that they're putting too much mayonnaise on their sandwiches. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I understand that sort of frame of reference or perspective. So it's the primary driving sort of philosophy here is like pretty much personal property and don't commit violence or
I wouldn't use the term
self-defense.
So those are things to consider. Personal property is a really loaded term because that's a communist term that inherently is anti-private property, but I get where you're going. But what I would say is the primary principle is the non-aggression principle, right? One cannot initiate aggression against another person. Now, if we want to go really nerdy, which I don't know if you're quite ready to go there, but maybe you do, read Hans Hermann Hoppe's primer for argumentation ethics. But the justification for the philosophy is, in short, is that when one argues, they must make a valid proposition. And so if a proposition is invalid, then it is an impossibility proof. Therefore, it is a performative right? It is, if I can prove that to be invalid in some regard, then it is not a justifiable position logically. And moral claims must be logical. And so the idea is that if you argue in favor of aggression or violence, the sheer fact that you're using your own body to do so means that you recognize a time preference. You must also recognize property that is required to continue argumentation, such as food, shelter, water, etc. And that you recognize that in order to make those claims justifiable, you must recognize private property rights, because if you did not, you would logically need the permission of every human being that has a justifiable claim to that property, which would include everyone in your community, everyone in the government, everyone that could ever possibly exist ever that could claim rights to that property, etc. And thus, in order to logically argue anything, one demonstrates a preference in the search for meaning and truth via argumentation for the rights of private property and the right of self-ownership of one's mind and body. And to do anything else, to argue anything else, is a performative contradiction. And so we would say that the real stem from this is that you do not have the rights to anybody else's property. You don't have positive rights. You only have negative rights, and that is freedom from aggression on your private property that you own as the sole private property owner. And all of the other kind of things you hear about stem from that, right? Freedom of association is really just freedom from the aggression of other people stopping you from associating with people you want to associate with, or aggression from people forcing you to associate with people that you don't want, and thus violating your right of self-ownership, right? Like, and over and over and over again, really, they're kind of just stemming from this idea of the non-aggression principle that stems from that text.
So if every citizen in America was given an option to either, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a way to make participation in the democratic process in America as a voluntary decision, and then if it was voluntary, I mean, I guess that, can you have a commune within anarcho-capitalism that decides within their commune, within their voluntary commune, they will not respect personal property, and that's a perfectly consistent.
No, it's impossible. It's impossible. However, you can, for example, have a commune where every single adult signs a contract, right? And that contract could have any number of voluntary stipulations, so long as it's not like an actual form of aggression against somebody, right? So, for example, let's say me and 200 of my friends, we buy a plot of land, okay? And then in this land, we say, everyone's going to sign a contract. I own the land. We're going to sign a deed, essentially, right? And what this deed says is that everyone here that voluntarily signs this contract agrees to share all of their property, to share the fruits of their labor, to live, an anarcho-communist lifestyle. Now, so long as you have the freedom to leave said commune whenever you want, and they don't kidnap you, right? And you could even set up a system of voting, for example, that votes on certain things. But at any point in time, you must have the right to divest from that system. And that means that you have a right to leave and be told, like, yeah, I'm done. I don't want to be here anymore. They can't force you there. And they also can't force children that come of age, right, into the contract. They must, when they come of age, they must sign onto the contract voluntarily, or be guests on someone else's private property and live by those rules. But they can't you can't kidnap people. But so long as you voluntarily choose to live by a certain system and you sign a contract and every adult is willing to sign that contract as well, that's just a private, that's no different than, like, let's say I build a mall and I say you must follow these rules when you come to the mall. And if you break these rules, I'm going to forcibly eject you from my property. Right? And if you damage my property, I'm going to consider that an act of aggression, and I'm going to demand restitution from you. So you can live in systems of self-governance or in systems known as like covenant communities where you agree voluntarily to certain rules and things of that nature. But you can't violate, you can't engage in acts of aggression towards another person. You can't, like, for example, you can't voluntarily coerce someone into rape, right? Because the rape is non-voluntary. Does that make sense?
It makes sense that rape is non-voluntary.
Exactly, right. So you can't do it. Like, it's not anarcho-capitalist philosophy at that point if you're engaging in non-voluntary forms of aggression against other people. But like voting, let's say, like, on like, what's the next building we're going to build in our commune, and we all kind of vote on it because we all signed a contract saying that we have limited resources, and the way we're going to choose to utilize those limited resources, we're going to have to determine whether or not we want to build another greenhouse so that we can have more food, or whether or not we're going to buy some more cattle and so that we can have, more meat. And we all got together and we decided we were going to vote for a greenhouse. Like, that's not an act of aggression because you signed a contract saying that's how we would allocate resources in this area, right? It's perfectly voluntary. It's not the same thing as the state that imposes you all of these things and these voting things that you didn't fucking vote on, and you have no choice on, and they have the sole power to tell you whatever it is that they want you to do, and you never got a choice in the matter.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I get that. I see how it's like essentially violence to force those choices upon you when you didn't voluntarily.
Yeah, Casimir makes a really solid point. From the outside, the commune as a single owner with a contract that potentially transfers that ownership to another person if they break certain rules, right? Like, to get into the technicals of it, that, right? Like, there must be a single private property owner and, appropriate title transfer of ownership. That's really more technical than, like, specifically, like, can this type of society exist?
Yeah, because, like, just to give a little bit more context, like, what is happening in crypto, or I don't know if you've read about these, but like these organizations called DAOs, DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. Mm-hmm. So it's basically, there'll be some product, some smart contract, some code that you can interact with, probably a front end as well, and there'll be a token that is given out to people who use that, and that token is governance weight. And I mean, that's like the bare bones framework, but and sort of like what you see there is a lot of issue with whales and large. Basically, it's like whoever has more money has more governance power.
Yeah. I don't see any problem with that. You know what I mean? Like it's not inherently violent unless right? Like you if you purchase that crypto, you own that crypto, right? Then you voluntarily chose to be a part of that, right?
Yes, absolutely. If you accumulated it, and I mean, it's not like only certain people. I mean, being an optimistic case, it's not like certain people get access to the token early. It's just anybody who is interacting with the platform or depositing liquidity, right, or being a liquidity
right. I think that's wonderful. I think the biggest strength, I think, of cryptocurrency is its competitive nature, right? I think that's honestly because we're going to see a lot of dumb shit tested out. That's not going to be helpful, right? And we're also going to see the technology utilized in ways we probably don't expect, smart contracts or, end-to-end encryption that is, that allows individuals to vote on things anonymously, but also much more secure in the way that they vote. than, let's say, paper ballots or things like that. There's a lot of really cool shit that can come from it. But ultimately, the thing that is really strong about cryptocurrency is that it is a competitive currency, right? And we already kind of have a competition in currency to a certain degree, right? Gold and silver is, Dogecoin specific, commodities that can be utilized as currencies, right? And the value of gold and silver changes and things like that. So, if you actually own the gold as opposed to owning stock in gold, then you own a different currency other than, crypto or fiat currency. The thing that I'm really excited for with crypto is the algorithms that will eventually be able to outpace central planning. Because I think that crypto has the potential to be wildly more stable as a Dogecoin specific currency, as a synthetic commodity currency, because there is a specific amount of the currency that will be released. So unlike fiat currency, you can't just release the currency at a whim. But that being said, there can be algorithms built into it that enact much the same way that the Federal Reserve does in terms of quantitative easing, or, and what you can do is you can increase or decrease the rate at which currency is mined or put out into the economy, based off of certain market identifiers. And I think what will likely happen is that we will see currencies that are more stable than the US dollar, because the algorithm will be more sophisticated and more accurate than monetary policy from institutions like the Federal Reserve, that will become staples of our currency that other currencies end up kind of attached to because of their stability, and will be widely used while still seeing competition in that market. And when they fail, it won't be an economic collapse like Weimar Germany, because you have a competition of currency, and people will liquidate their currency for other currencies when they see things failing, etc. And because of this, you have this massive competition of currencies. You have an overall much more stable economy that is far less likely to be infected with high inflation or with a boom and bust cycle of the economy.
Yeah, I mean, we've already started to see some experiments like that, like this one stable coin called RAI, RAI, which has a free floating peg with basically a sort of a variable interest rate where it can even go negative, and they've basically just like bit the bullet on maintaining a peg to $1. It's pretty interesting. It's been in development for, I mean, it's out, it's there, but the team has been working on it for at least like 2 years, I think.
Yeah, I mean, but I think the competition and the lack of a monopoly is really the true strength that crypto, that unleashes crypto. Right? It's not any one individual currency. Like, as much as I love cryptocurrency and its power, the thing I hate about some crypto bros is like this weird kind of culture around Bitcoin. That like,
oh yeah,
Bitcoin is the way of the future. Bitcoin is everything. Buy Bitcoin.
Those guys
and
are
it's
Bitcoin
like,
maxis.
Yeah, like the Bitcoin maxis is like, dude, like there's so many possibilities. I don't understand why you're. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. Bitcoin is a good cryptocurrency, and it is a synthetic commodity currency technically, though the algorithm is really like just an exponential.
Wine, in my opinion, that's what like Bitcoin is a proof of concept. Of blockchain currencies, and it'll always be the first, always be the one to prove that it can work.
Right,
and its origin history is just like beautiful and perfect. But at the end of the day, it's like Bitcoin is just a better form of gold, in my opinion, in terms of a speculative asset. I think it beats gold on every single metric.
Yeah, and gold beats the US dollar, so that's saying something.
Well, yeah, and the dollar has a much larger market cap, but regardless,
of course, yes,
yeah. What do you think about? Okay, so here's where we might diverge, because I feel like if you have let's just talk about a very simple situation, a self-contained uh, country, which I mean, just a self-contained system using one currency. I feel like you can have a tax system that enables UBI to basically just supercharge the entire innovation capital creation process.
Yeah, I disagree that UBI will do that. I don't think it's possible. I don't think that UBI is UBI better than, let's say, social welfare programs that steal even more money and waste it? Yes.
Yeah, well, you're on that at least.
Right. Like it's better than, let's say, Medicare or Medicaid, right? Like these are programs that are full of fraud, waste, and abuse. And so if we were simply to take that money and redistribute that money to the people that are on Medicare or Medicaid and just give them money, you know what I mean? Like that purely redistributing that wealth is more effective than those government programs. But ultimately, I would say that the idea of, even if you voluntarily did it, right? Like everyone signs a contract to live in a nation like Prospaya, right? Which is a kind of a test in corporate nation building in South America, that still pays taxes to the government, but is like trying out that idea of like a corporate town, right? Even if you had a voluntary system of taxation within a system like that, in an enclosed system, and everyone agreed to do it, and if they didn't agree to do it, they were bought out in some capacity and they left, right? So everyone wanted to do this. It would still be less efficient with less innovation than a free market, in my opinion. And the reason I would say that is kind of looking at, Hayek's Road to Serfdom. He doesn't fully come out in this. Really, he's really talking more about like kind of how much the government spends to find the price equation. But what I would argue is that ultimately the state, or in this situation of voluntary covenant community, they must do research and expend resources that they took via taxation, and utilize that to try and determine via central planners the best way to distribute that. And there's all kinds of problems with that. Number one, that research requires additional money taken out that can't be reallocated in an appropriate way that is effective. And number two, there are massive amounts of unintended consequences. And so ultimately, I would say that social welfare programs of any degree are going to lead to less innovation and less prosperity than a free market system that is truly a free market system, not a system like, let's say, early 1900s America that is rampant with, regulatory capture, using the power of the state to punish the poor, and things of that nature.
So it's, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. It sounded like you were saying that you said that it's basically too expensive to research to make it worthwhile.
Yeah. So, I mean, like if you're talking just specifically with UBI, right? Because I was kind of like critiquing things like Medicare and Medicaid, right? But if you're talking just specifically like redistributing the wealth, right?
Yeah.
What you are doing is you are taking away resources that the market has demanded have investment, and you're reducing that investment to put it in places that the market is not demanding investment, right? Which is simply, and so the problem there, right, is that while you may see short-term gains and things like that you can kind of like use pseudoscience and bad economic theory to justify as a marked improvement from UBI, ultimately what you're doing is you are wasting resources that the market had already determined would be better placed in another sector. And so ultimately this is going to reduce innovation. This is actually going to cripple innovation in some ways, right? Especially innovation that specifically pertains towards making goods and services cheaper for the poor or giving opportunities to the poor, because now the UBI is kind of like stopping that innovation and taking it from other places. So I don't see a way in which you could justify without kind of just like bad economic theory that UBI is more effective.
I guess the way I look at it is It's taking economic resources away from things that it was already theoretically privately going to be allocated to something, and it's taking away from that and redistributing it to just across the population to everybody.
Right. I mean, like if it's a progressive UBI system, then directly to the poor, and if it's not a progressive system, then it's still wealth redistribution because it's relative to income. It's going to be more for the poor than it is for the wealthy, and the tax structure.
I think a non-progressive structure is just more.
Well, you can't have
realistic.
You can't have a non-progressive tax and UBI at the same time, because if there's like a flat tax, right, on income, then the UBI isn't doing anything other than just taxing at a flat rate and then giving back at a flat rate. So it'd have to be progressive, or it would have to be like a consumption tax or a value-added tax or something like that, which are both essentially progressive taxes.
Why can't it be a flat income tax with just a flat amount per person? And the income tax is greater than whatever the UBI is.
Right. It wouldn't be a progressive tax, but it would have the same effect, right? So if a millionaire is getting taxed 10% and someone making 30,000 is getting taxed 10%, then like, yes, it's a flat tax. So it's not technically a progressive tax system, but it's like, it's still taxing the poor more than it's taxing the wealthy. Even though the relative income is the same, the marginal propensity to consume and the marginal propensity to save is different, right? So the poor, for example, in our current system in America, their marginal propensity to consume is usually a value over 1.1, right? Which is to say they're spending all of the money that they get, and then they're also getting some forms of government benefits and programs, at least in some degree, that is they're actually a drain on the tax system, right? And then if you go to the very wealthy, their marginal propensity to consume is like 0.1. So like, yeah, it's not technically a progressive tax, but like once you dig in a little deeper into like the effect, it's kind of the point of UBI, right? Is that it's redistributing wealth to the poor and the middle class from the wealthy, even if it's a flat tax.
Right. So basically, how I think about it is like redirecting that capital to essentially, the poor, creates a lot more. I guess like possibilities of business and innovation, and the more you can maximize that surface area for the ability to put energy into building a business or researching some product or whatever it is, the better the entire society would be. And so also from like, say I'm a billionaire, from my perspective, even if I wanted to direct all my capital in the most efficient manner, I would not be able to, because I just simply can't speak to everyone, can't know what's happening all over around the entire world at the same time. So
that's not important. So
limitations.
Let me maybe put it in a hypothetical situation, right? Let's say that you are a billionaire, right? Okay. Now let's also say that you produce, you make, we'll go with the beds, right? Beds that people sleep in, right? So this is a necessary kind of commodity. Most people would say it's fairly necessary. I mean, you don't technically need a bed, right? But it's a pretty good thing to have a bed, right? Like most people, if they're looking at things they're going to spend money on, they're going to buy a bed at some point, right? Now, let's say that if we look at the history of beds in the United States of America, what we have found is that the pricing on beds has actually followed the Gini coefficient, right? And the Gini coefficient is essentially just the ratio measure of income inequality.
Yes, I'm familiar with the Gini coefficient.
Fair enough, but I'm streaming to a Twitch audience, so sometimes.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Yeah, sometimes don't be offended if I explain something. I'm not trying to patronize you. I'm just, you never know who might be watching, so I want to explain certain things. Right. So beds pricing has gone like this, or I should say like this. right? Cheap beds have become cheaper and expensive beds have become more expensive. And the reason for that is because as income inequality has increased, right? The wealthy can spend more money on beds. So they do research into how to make the best bed possible to justify charging you more money for a bed, because there's a market for people to buy really expensive, really good beds, because it's really nice to sleep on a really high quality, $4,000 mattress. At the same time, that innovation has led to the ability to produce beds at a cheaper rate, right? Learning those things for the wealthy has made it easier to make beds cheaper. And as income inequality has increased, the demand for cheaper beds gets higher and higher, because if people have less money and they have less money to spend on a bed and they're just going to buy a cheap bed, what they're going to do is they're going to buy the cheapest bed they can get. And so if your competitor makes a bed that functions perfectly fine, but is a little bit cheaper because they made it able to be cheaper, then they're going to win to a large portion of people that go to Walmart or go to some website trying to find the cheapest available bed that isn't used. And most people don't want used beds. It's another reason why beds are a good example. A lot of people feel icky about using a bed someone else slept in or fucked in, right? And so now we add a tax into our system. So you make these beds. Your cheapest beds are $200 and your most expensive beds are $10,000, right? And you make a 10% profit off of each bed, which is to say you make $20 in profit off of the cheapest bed, right? And you make $100 in profit off of, $1,000 in profit off of the most expensive bed. But you move a lot more units of the cheap bed. So both products are important to your bottom line, right? Now, you're doing so with no taxes, except someone adds a 10% tax so that they can have UBI. So now what has happened is tax collectors have been paid, right? A system of governance to determine how much money people actually make is there. So now the IRS needs to be created to audit people to ensure that they're paying that they're paying their fair share in taxes and they're not cheating the system, right? Some form of government banking institution needs to exist so that they can reallocate these resources, right? And
well, what if to simplify it, what if we said there was some simple back-end system that automated the taxes? Okay. So there's no need for an IRS. It's basically you legally. I guess you could make an illegal transaction.
Right, that's a fantasy world. Like, you could do really a lot of cool shit with cryptocurrency, but at the end of the day, like, people will cheat. People will find ways around things, and it's a constant. People will find ways to commit fraud, right? And so
that's true.
They'll switch to some form of hard currency or something, and there will be money launderers. That will always exist, and so there will always be, with this tax, there will always need to be tax collectors in some regard, or at least a few watchmen to look over the system. You're going to need people to investigate people for fraud. You're going to need a system that is put together to ensure, however that works, that these taxes get evenly distributed. But see, here's the problem. The billionaire bed maker now makes $0 in profit off of the beds. And so what does he do? He increases the cost of his beds. So now beds cost $11,000 at the top end, and they cost $220 at the bottom end. So he increases his prices by 10% in order to accommodate to the fact that he has a 10% tax. And so, yes, money is taken and then redistributed, and now beds are 10% more expensive. And so what has occurred is that ultimately, because prices increase, right? The poor people that have a marginal propensity to consume that is higher than the rich people are taxed at a higher rate via inflation. So the entire tax system is actually designed in many ways to increase costs to increase the cost of production, which then increases the prices. And the people that do the most consumption are the people that are the most hurt by the taxes in and of themselves, which turns out to be the poorer you are, the more you consume. The entire idea of a tax structure actually works to benefit the wealthy at the expense of making it harder for the poor and the middle class to climb out of poverty. And it incurs additional costs that simply would not have been there had the tax system not been there to begin with. And so what I would say is it's a waste of resources, and it is a system that creates a form of inflation that disproportionately affects the poor and the middle class, and the wealthy know this and they love it.
But and I guess this might be something I just have to like get like a piece of paper out and do math on my own, but like don't the UBI that is received is larger than the sum, you know, increase cost burden from price inflation, especially for like the poorer you are, the bigger the difference that UBI is going to make.
Yeah, UBI is going to make a bigger difference to the poor than it is to the wealthy because of that marginal propensity to consume and save as well, right? Relative to how much disposable income you have per se. So if you have no disposable income, UBI all of a sudden is a bunch of disposable income. My argument, however, is that the drain on the system and the increased prices will ultimately be more expensive to the poor and the middle class than the UBI itself is. Unless you had a progressive tax system, right? But once you add a progressive tax system, right, now you have even more allocation of resources away from those that innovate and are successful, because the market has shown them to be successful. That's why they're successful, right? Towards those that their general output is less than those other individuals. That's why they're poor and middle class. Now, there are other extraneous factors, obviously, right? But ultimately, in order to actually fix this in such a way that it's actually not disproportionately harming the poor and the middle class, at least on the front end, you have to have a progressive tax system. And now what you're doing is you're reducing your GDP, you're reducing your innovation, which ultimately, right, means less wealth and less growth for the society as a whole.
So I feel like you're like you just assume that GDP will go. It's negative GDP as like a flat impact.
Yes,
but
I assume that.
What I'm proposing is that I guess my belief is that it requires the UBI to outpace the inflation burden created by UBI, because I would imagine that would create more, people, when you have more money and you're not burdened by bills and things, you have more freedom to build and invest and choose a different life direction.
I would argue
prospect.
I would argue that if you're doing something that causes inflation, and then you're hoping that the UBI outpaces the inflation, what you're really doing is you're incentivizing things like student loan debt, right? You're incentivizing debt as a means of growth. But ultimately what that debt is really just high time preference. And that incentivization of high time preference is going to be ultimately damaging on the economy in a number of ways, because we know that high time preference is really bad. But when you incentivize debt as a form of creation of wealth, because the inflation, presumably lessens the burden of interest and things like that, you then begin incentivizing those things. And now you get into a whole nother system of like, how long before all of a sudden we accept fractional reserve banking, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like you start getting these other influences that like, oh, it's only one more step. I know it's a bit of a fallacy to bring the slippery slope into this, but like, I don't think it's based on sound economic theory. And I think starting from there is only going to lead to a society that wants more government solutions to problems the government is creating in the first place. And the UBI is essentially a government problem it would be creating.
Yeah. I mean, I see where you're coming from, and also I appreciate you helping me to think about it, because
yeah, I mean, I believe it or not, economics is not one of my big strong points as an ANCAP. I mean, we tend to be pretty strong on economics in general, but most people come to anarcho-capitalism through economic theory. You know, I came from it much the same way you did, not crypto, but I was like a Bernie bro in the very beginning, and like a lefty. And, you know, it was more of a hatred of the state and government and other things like that.
Yeah.
And then the theory, actually, the moral philosophy, or I should say ethics, kind of and legal theory pulled me kicking and screaming in anarcho-capitalism. So, you know, I do my best to explain like the economic positions, and I do all right, but.
And so how do you, I mean, I guess this is like going to be like sort of the last topic I want to bring up, because it's not even really related to what we were talking before, but how do you think about in general the US sort of empire? Like, what type of are your goals to basically educate as many people about sort of libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism, and to try to spur a long curve change in society?
Yeah, so the name of the channel is Fabian Liberty, and we stole it from the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society was a socialist organization in the UK that still exists today, but they eventually became part of Labour Party. And the idea was, the more you convince people to take on programs like UBI, for example, or social safety net programs, the more socialist you will become, and eventually we can get full-blown socialism, communism, you know, or state socialism by that metric. And so we kind of took the inverse of that. And it comes from Fabius, who was a general, the first Roman general to defeat Hannibal. And his basic strategy was hit and run tactics and burning the colonies, which is Latin for farm, right? It's where the term colony comes from. It's Latin for farm, because the Latins would, the Romans would put Roman retired soldiers, they'd give them farmland in an area, and they knew that it would help keep the local population under control. So the first like real form of colonization came from the Roman farmlands that they would gift to retired soldiers. And so the way that he defeated Hannibal is he knew that in a full frontal attack, he couldn't win. Same, much like me, in a full frontal attack against the United States government, I'm not very confident that libertarians win that, right? And so instead, what I will do is much like Fabius, I'll hit and run tactics, and he starved his supply lines by burning the farms and forced him to retreat because he needed to be resupplied through the Alps. So the idea is, bit by bit, we engage in the philosophy, and we engage in teaching people, and we hope that we can curtail government power a little bit at a time and ride this wave out. And every time less government is proposed as a solution, and it works, the more people see the concept proof positive as a good thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I basically have totally exited the dollar system. I don't even take profits. I just leave it all in crypto, because I can't even morally justify taking profits and then having to pay taxes on that to then support just the insanity I see.
Yeah, I mean, motherfuckers got to eat. You know what I mean? Like, you need to take care of yourself first and foremost.
Yeah, I mean, I can
like,
cash
you have to
out,
survive.
I'm allowed to cash out under 40,000 a year and not have to pay any capital gains on that, and so
it's pretty good.
That's fine. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is Tornado Cash. I don't know if you know about this or know what's going on with Tornado Cash, or have read anything about it.
No, like I said, I'm not a crypto bro. I know enough about the economics of it and the occasional things about it, but like when a new crypto comes out, it's like,
Well, Tornado Cash is a protocol built on top of its smart contract on top of Ethereum that allows you to deposit tokens in, and then you can withdraw them to another wallet without revealing what deposit it came from. So it basically cryptographically hides identity of the tokens. And at the in August, the Treasury Department sanctioned a huge list of contract addresses, the smart contracts themselves, related to the project. And in, I don't know, somewhere in Europe, Finland, I think, or something like that, one of the devs was arrested. And basically, what the US government is saying is that this smart contract was being used by North Korean hackers to launder
Right, sure.
cryptocurrency, which, that might be true. I'm not going to, you can launder crypto through it. It is something that you can use the technology for. But primarily the technology is just for privacy because I don't know. I'm sure you sort of probably know this, but like on Ethereum, every transaction is public. All wallets.
Well, I mean, yeah, no, I mean, it's just the government. I mean, I'd have to look into the story, but like my first initial kind of like interaction with it is it's just the state, going against a challenger that, goes against their monopoly on currency. I mean, it would be no different than like arresting everyone that had Monero because Monero was used for God knows how many awful things, right? But ultimately, like, that's not the owners of Monero's
arresting
fault.
Anybody who holds cash at all.
Like, right. You know what I mean? Like, didn't you guys, government in school, tell me not to lick dollar bills because of the amount of people that snort cocaine through them rolled up, and I might like I might get high or get germs off of the fucking dollar bills. Like, what are you talking about? Like, should we go and arrest the Federal Reserve or like Wachovia because people do the same thing? Like, no, it's just a system of privacy. Or what was that email service that was end-to-end encrypted that the FBI forced to shut down? It was one of the ones Edward Snowden used. Oh god,
I can't remember the name either. But
you know what I'm talking about, though, right?
I do know what the website you're talking about.
It was like Digibytes or some shit. I can't remember what the fuck it was. Something weird like that. But yeah, there was an email service where like and the FBI demanded that they have backdoor access to be able to view everyone's fucking records through it. And he told them to go fuck themselves, and they said, "Well, we're going to arrest you if you don't do it." And so he just shut it down.
Based
because that's what he thought the only ethical thing to do was. I don't know. There's a UN meeting or something or like a big meeting about it. And you can see an interview with the guy in Citizen 4. You watch it.
Gotcha. But
which if you're a libertarian and you haven't seen Citizen 4, shame on you.
Oh no, I've seen Citizen 4.
I don't mean you, I mean the audience again.
Yeah. Gotcha. But yeah, I just wanted to bring up the Tornado Cash because like there's currently a lawsuit in process. Coinbase actually stepped up and is sort of sponsoring.
I would say stick around in the Discord. I think there's probably quite a few people that would be interested if you type out or put those articles or think that would be interested in talking with you about that. There's like over 400 people in our Discord, and most of them are libertarians or ANCAPs or objectivists, weirdly enough.
Awesome. Yeah, but like I appreciated this conversation. I really enjoyed it. Sorry if I'm pretty fucking stupid. I know.
You're not stupid, man. It took I'm like 19 months to if you were to watch like the original conversations between Mark and I when we first started streaming, like Jesus Christ, we were stupid. You know what I mean? Like it takes a while to be able to do something to an audience and have like a flowing conversation. I appreciate the questions. I like having these conversations.
Yeah, once I find the crypto DAO utopia that is both anarcho-capitalist and communist, I'll come back to tell you all about it.
And we'll have the helicopters warmed up for your commie ass.
Anyways, take it easy, man.
You too.
Stay safe.
You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.